Milk is supposed to be simple, right? Fresh from the farm, pasteurized, bottled, and delivered to your refrigerator. A wholesome staple that's been part of Scandinavian culture for centuries. But here's the dirty secret the dairy industry doesn't want you to know. Most milk in Scandinavian supermarkets isn't what you think. It's produced by companies that have been accused of greenwashing, linked to controversial feed additives, owned by multinational corporations with troubling track records, or operating under monopolistic structures that hurt both farmers and consumers. I've spent weeks researching this, reading corporate reports, examining scientific literature, and digging through regulatory filings. What I discovered is genuinely shocking. Swedish studies have found that very high milk consumption, over 1 liter per day, is associated with a 35% higher risk of major adverse coronary events. Meanwhile, milk and dairy products contribute approximately half of the total saturated fat intake in Nordic diets. But it's not just about health, it's about deception. Brands positioning themselves as traditional Scandinavian cooperatives while using controversial chemical additives. Companies marketing themselves as farmer-owned while being controlled by French multinationals. Dairy giants accused of greenwashing while their methane emissions exceed those of entire countries. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly which brands to avoid, what's really happening behind the pastoral imagery, and how the Scandinavian dairy industry has been quietly transformed while you weren't paying attention. Number 5. Arla. Arla Foods is the elephant in the room. It's the 5th largest dairy company in the world and the dominant force in Scandinavian dairy. At the start of 2022, over 8,400 farmers across Denmark, Sweden, Germany, the UK, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg owned this cooperative. Arla produces everything from basic milk to Lurpak butter, Castello cheeses, and protein products. You probably consume Arla products daily without even realizing it. So what's the problem with the region's biggest dairy brand? Let's start with the Bovaer controversy. In November 2024, Arla Foods UK announced it would trial a methane-reducing feed additive called Bovaer across 30 dairy farms. The idea was to reduce cow methane emissions by up to 27%. Sounds environmentally responsible, right? The backlash was immediate and fierce. Consumers started pouring Arla milk down their sinks and toilets. Videos went viral on TikTok showing people throwing away Lurpak butter in protest. The hashtag Boycott Arla spread across social media. UK MP Rupert Lowe called for an urgent government review. Here's what concerned people. Bovaer contains an active ingredient called 3-nitrooxypropanol, or 3-NOP. According to the UK Food Standards Agency's own report, this chemical should be considered corrosive to the eyes, a skin irritant, and potentially harmful by inhalation. Farmers handling the substance need protective equipment. Now, regulatory bodies have approved Bovaer as safe for consumers, stating it doesn't pass into milk or meat. But the consumer backlash highlighted a deeper issue. People felt they were being experimented on without consent. As Patrick Holden, advisor to King Charles and founder of the Sustainable Food Trust, put it, feeding cows potions to reduce emissions is a classic case of the dairy industry treating the symptoms rather than the cause of the problem. But the controversies don't stop there. In February 2025, the Changing Markets Foundation and Greenpeace Nordic released a damning 100-page report titled Dairy Tales, Arla's smokescreen for its lack of climate action. The report accused Arla of greenwashing, using misleading sustainability claims to mask failure to take meaningful climate action. The findings were brutal. Greenpeace Nordic estimated that Arla's annual methane emissions reach 13.4 million tons of CO2 equivalent. To put that in perspective, that exceeds the entire agricultural methane output of the Netherlands. Despite methane accounting for 43% of Arla's total emissions, according to the company's own 2023 annual report, Arla lacks clear targets for methane reduction. The report found that Arla fully meets just one of 9 relevant recommendations from the UN high-level expert group's Integrity Matters guidelines for credible net zero targets. The company only partially meets 5 recommendations and fails to comply with 3 entirely. There's also the question of who benefits from Arla's structure. The report criticized Arla for running undemocratic structures and incentives that benefit larger, more industrial farms, while burdening smaller farmers with substantial infrastructure and compliance costs. And then there's Arla's history of market manipulation. In 2006, the company's sales were seriously affected by a 2-month boycott of Danish products in the Middle East. More recently, ActionAid Denmark filed an OECD complaint against Arla, alleging that the company's EU-subsidized exports of cheap milk powder were undermining milk industries in the global south and harming the livelihoods of local farmers. Arla isn't evil, but this is a company that markets itself as a farmer-friendly cooperative while operating as a global industrial dairy giant, with emissions exceeding those of some countries. When you buy Arla, you're supporting a system that critics say prioritizes scale over sustainability. Number 4. Tine. Tine is the largest Norwegian dairy product cooperative, consisting of around 15,000 farmers and 5,600 employees. It has a virtual monopoly on dairy in Norway. In many dairy categories, Tine faces little or no domestic competition. This monopolistic position has led to criticism whenever shortages occur. And shortages have occurred. Norway faced a milk shortage in early 2024 after demand miscalculations and adverse climate conditions. But that's not even the most controversial part. In response to the shortage, Tine turned to foreign milk powder imports from Germany. Here's where it gets deceptive. Tine kept the Nytt Norge label, which translates to Enjoy Norway, on products that now contained German milk powder. This was perceived by many Norwegians as a deliberate attempt to mislead consumers who thought they were buying purely Norwegian products. Tine eventually apologized and published a review identifying products containing imported milk powder, but the damage to consumer trust was done. Then there's the corruption scandal. In 2017, the Norwegian Economic and Environmental Crime Unit, Økokrim, opened an investigation into the commercial relationship between Tine and Tetra Pak. A newspaper alleged that a Tine employee was treated to travel, spa visits, gifts, 145 dinners, and 246 rounds of drinks over a 4-year period from 2011 to 2015 by a Tetra Pak seller. The trips included destinations like Rio de Janeiro, London, and Japan. Tine controls an estimated 80% of the market in Norway for dairy products and juices, and as the state market regulator, it controls production and sets prices that are supposed to yield good returns for all players. Critics argue this dual role creates conflicts of interest, but perhaps the most concerning recent development involves Bover again. Tine launched what it called Future Milk, sourced from cows given the Bover additive. Anne Catherine Wist, Tine's vice president for R&D, admitted the response was polarized. Some said it was unnatural, and even that it could cause cancer. Some said it was greenwashing, she told the media. Then came the crisis in Denmark. In October 2025, the Danish government mandated that farms with over 50 cows must add Bovaer to their dairy rations. What followed was alarming. Over 100 Danish farmers reported that their cows suffered health problems after being fed Bovaer. Reports included cows collapsing, lethargy, reduced feed intake, fever, diarrhea, miscarriages, and significant drops in milk production. The Danish Dairy Board received over 200 complaints. A survey by Segs Innovation found that 66% of responding herds reported reduced feed intake and 68% reported lower milk yield after using Bover. In response, Norway halted the use of Bover. Tine, which had been preparing to implement Bover as part of a 2027 mandate, put the additive on hold until further notice. The precautionary principle, they called it. Think about that. A chemical that was approved by regulatory bodies across Europe and supposedly underwent rigorous safety testing is now being suspended in multiple countries after real-world use revealed problems that laboratory studies apparently missed. When you buy Tine products, you're supporting a monopoly that controls Norwegian dairy with minimal competition, has been caught labeling foreign milk powder as Norwegian, was investigated for potential corruption, and was ready to feed its cows a chemical additive now suspended due to health concerns. If you're shocked by what the Scandinavian dairy industry has been hiding? Be sure to subscribe. The last 3 brands on this list are even worse. What I'm about to reveal about foreign ownership and feed contamination scandals could completely change the way you think about Scandinavian milk forever. Hit that notification bell because you won't want to miss this. Number 3. Norrmejerier. Norrmejerier is a Swedish dairy cooperative based in northern Sweden, serving around 300 dairy farms in the Boreal region. They market themselves as the authentic northern Swedish dairy, with products featuring the Swedish flag prominently on packaging. Their messaging emphasizes local production and Swedish origin. Sounds wholesome, right? That's exactly what they want you to think. Norrmejerier was one of the first Swedish dairies to jump on the Bover bandwagon. They introduced what they called climate milk, sourced from cows fed the controversial additive. Since 2023, Norrmejerier used Bover while other Swedish dairies held back. Then came November 2025. After reports emerged from Denmark of cows collapsing, becoming sick, and dying, Norrmejerier quietly discontinued their climate milk program. They pulled the plug without fanfare. Think about that timeline. Norrmejerier fed their cows a chemical additive for 2 years, marketed the resulting milk as environmentally responsible, and then stopped when the bad news couldn't be ignored anymore. What happened to the consumers who bought that climate milk during those 2 years? They were essentially participants in an experiment they didn't consent to. This isn't the only Swedish dairy that abandoned ship. Gesene Dairy, which had the last remaining Bover project in Sweden, also ended their program. As of late November 2025, there are no known dairy producers giving their cows Bover in Sweden anymore. The Swedish Milk Farmers Association had been urging Swedish dairies to reject the supplement all along. But here's what really concerns me about Norrmejerier. The dairy production system in northern Sweden operates under challenging conditions. The subarctic climate means cows spend most of the year indoors, with grazing limited to approximately 3 summer months. A survey of Norrmejerier farms found that dairy cows often graze within half a kilometer of the barn, while dry cows and heifers graze on average 3.5 kilometers away, with some up to 25 kilometers from the barn. This isn't pastoral farming. This is industrial production adapted to harsh conditions. The romantic image of Nordic dairy farming, with cows grazing on pristine mountain pastures, doesn't match the reality of most commercial operations. Research from the region shows that the most common grazing strategy on dairy farms was continuous grazing, with only 45% using rotational grazing. The main challenges reported include trampling damage and seasonal variations in grass growth. For organic farmers, weed control is the primary challenge. When you buy Norrmejerier products, you're supporting a dairy that experimented with controversial feed additives for 2 years, marketed it as climate-friendly, then quietly abandoned the program when problems emerged elsewhere. Their Swedish flag packaging sells an image that may not reflect modern industrial dairy reality. Number 2. Scandinavia. Scandinavia is based in Malmö and is Sweden's second-largest dairy company after Arla. Their brands include Scandinavia, Bravo, Alarum, Jordnära, Åsens, and Lindahls. Annual revenue exceeds 4 billion Swedish kroner. They market themselves as caring about the Swedish dairy farmer and the diversity of the Swedish dairy market. Here's what the marketing doesn't tell you. Since 2012, Scandinavia has been owned by Groupe Lactalis, a French multinational and the world's largest dairy products corporation, operating 211 production sites in 37 countries. When you buy Scandinavia, you're not supporting Swedish farmers. You're sending money to a French family-held corporation with one of the most disturbing track records in the food industry. Let me tell you about Lactalis. In 2017, one of the biggest food safety scandals in recent European history exploded. Lactalis was forced to recall over 7,000 tons of baby formula and powdered milk products from 83 countries after salmonella contamination was discovered at their factory in Craon, France. At least 38 babies fell sick in France, Spain, and Greece. Some required hospitalization, but it gets worse. Lactalis knew about the contamination months before the recall. The company detected traces of salmonella in August 2017 and again in November 2017. They cleaned the site both times, but didn't alert authorities. Under French law, they didn't have to. Government inspectors even visited the factory in September 2017 and found nothing wrong because they didn't review the area where baby formula was produced. The Institut Pasteur, France's leading bacteriology institution, found evidence that the salmonella had been present at the Crayon facility since 2005. 12 years of potential contamination. In February 2023, Lactalis was formally charged with aggravated fraud, involuntary bodily harm, and failure to carry out a recall order. The company is seeking over €1 billion in compensation from the laboratory it claims failed to detect the salmonella. But critics say Lactalis is trying to shift blame for its own negligence. And this isn't Lactalis's only controversy. In 2020, the company breached the Dairy Code of Conduct in Australia. Between 2000 and 2013, Lactalis was involved in forming cartels with other milk companies in Europe. This is the corporation that now owns Sweden's second-largest dairy. When Scandinavia was acquired in 2012, it was a cooperative owned by approximately 570 Swedish dairy farmers. Now it's a subsidiary of a French multinational with a horrific track record on food safety. The acquisition was investigated by the European Commission. Competitor Arla even wrote to the Commission expressing concerns about the transaction. Following the deal, the vertical integration ceased. Swedish farmers still produce the milk, but the profitable downstream dairy production, the processing and marketing, is now controlled by Lactalis. Around 400 dairy farmers in Skåne and southern Sweden still supply milk to Scandinavia's dairies, but those farmers are now effectively supplying a French multinational, not a Swedish cooperative. Think about what this means. You walk into a Swedish supermarket, see Swedish flags on the packaging, read about caring for Swedish dairy farmers, and buy what you think is a local product. Meanwhile, your money flows to a French corporation that poisoned babies in 2017 and has been forming illegal cartels. This is modern food industry deception at its finest. Number 1. Falköpings Mejeri. This is hands down the most deceptive milk brand you can buy in Scandinavia. And if you're drinking this, you need to understand what's really going on. Falköpings Mejeri presents itself as the opposite of everything we've discussed. It's a local dairy cooperative owned by about 200 farmers in the Falköping area of western Sweden. They emphasize locally produced, Swedish milk. They don't sell abroad. They pay their farmers better than Arla does. The milk travels a maximum of 75 to 80 kilometers from farm to dairy. On paper, this sounds perfect. The wholesome alternative to multinational corporate dairy. But here's the problem. What Falköpings Mejeri represents is a dying model being used to sell you an illusion about the broader Scandinavian dairy industry. The Swedish dairy industry has been collapsing. The number of dairy farms has been in constant decline for years. Sales of unflavored milk in Sweden have decreased by almost 40% in the last decade. Brown cheese consumption has dropped by over 30% in just 15 years. Import competition is crushing domestic producers. Small cooperatives like Falköpings Mejeri survive by charging premium prices for the local image. But they're not fixing the system. They're surviving despite it. And here's what really concerns me. Falköpings Mejeri was part of a proposed deal that the Swedish Competition Authority had to block. The transaction would have allowed just 3 companies, Arla Foods, Falköpings Mejeri, and Norrmejeriet, to jointly control Svensk Mjölk AB, which owns the licenses for popular Swedish cheese brands like Präst, Herrgård, and Greve. The Competition Authority said the concentration would significantly restrict competition and that if there is diminished competition, it is always the consumers who suffer in the end through higher prices and reduced selection. In other words, even the supposedly good local cooperative was willing to participate in cartel-like arrangements that would harm consumers. Then there's the broader context of Swedish dairy. Animal welfare investigations have revealed disturbing conditions on Swedish dairy farms, including Arla-affiliated operations. Hidden camera footage has shown cows beaten with tools, poorly nourished animals covered in feces, and calves handled with blatant disregard. One investigation documented a cow unable to stand being repeatedly kicked, beaten, and jumped on. The dairy industry response? These are isolated incidents, but animal welfare organizations argue that the fundamental economics of industrial dairy, even in supposedly high welfare Scandinavian countries, create pressure that leads to these outcomes. And there's the health question that applies to all Scandinavian milk. Swedish research published in the British Journal of Nutrition found that very high intakes of non-fermented milk, over 1,000 grams per day, were associated with a 35% higher risk of major adverse coronary events compared to low intakes under 200 grams per day. Milk and dairy products contribute approximately half of the total saturated fat intake in Nordic and Baltic diets. While the health impacts of dairy remain debated, with some studies showing benefits from fermented products like yogurt and cheese, the relationship between high milk consumption and health isn't as clear-cut as the industry wants you to believe. When you buy Falköpings Mejeri, you're paying a premium for an image of how Scandinavian dairy used to be. But that image obscures the reality of an industry in decline, willing to form anti-competitive arrangements, operating in a broader system where animal welfare violations occur, and selling a product whose health benefits are more complicated than the marketing suggests. Here's what you need to understand about the Scandinavian dairy industry. It's built on nostalgia and pastoral imagery that doesn't match modern reality. Most milk comes from large-scale operations, where cows spend most of the year indoors. The major players are either multinationals, monopolies, or cooperatives willing to experiment with controversial additives and form anti-competitive arrangements. So what should you buy instead? If you absolutely must buy milk, here are better options. First, organic milk from certified farms. Look for KRAV certification in Sweden or DBO in Norway. Organic standards prohibit additives like Bovaer, which isn't approved for organic farming. Animal welfare standards are generally higher, and environmental regulations are stricter. Second, small local dairies that sell directly. If you can find a local farm that sells milk directly, you can actually visit, see conditions, and talk to the farmer. This is increasingly rare, but it's the only way to truly know what you're getting. Third, fermented dairy products. Research consistently shows that fermented milk products like yogurt and cheese have different, often more favorable, health associations than liquid milk. A Swedish study found that fermented milk and cheese were inversely associated with mortality, meaning higher consumption was linked to lower death rates, while non-fermented milk showed the opposite pattern at high consumption levels. Fourth, plant-based alternatives. Yes, I'm going there. Data from Our World in Data shows that plant-based milks like oat, soy, and almond have significantly lower environmental impacts across all metrics. They cause around 3 times less greenhouse gas emissions, use around 10 times less land, and create much lower levels of eutrophication than cow's milk. Swedish company Oatly has significantly impacted the dairy market precisely because consumers are looking for alternatives. The best option is to reduce overall consumption and be selective about what dairy you do consume. Choose fermented products over liquid milk, organic over conventional, and local over industrial whenever possible. This video opened your eyes to the Scandinavian dairy industry's hidden reality. Smash that like button right now. Share this with everyone you know. Most Scandinavians have no idea that their traditional dairy brands are owned by French multinationals, experimenting with controversial additives or operating monopolies with minimal accountability. The pastoral image of Nordic dairy, with happy cows grazing on pristine meadows, is increasingly a marketing fantasy. Behind those images are industrial operations, corporate consolidation, controversial chemical additives, and a system that critics say benefits large farms at the expense of small farmers and consumers. Subscribe to this channel because I'm exposing more food industry secrets that are affecting Scandinavians' health and wallets. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next video. The choice is yours. Keep buying into the illusion, or start demanding transparency from the companies that supply your food. What you do with this information is up to you.